in order to let his buddies all have a go with his girlfriend. The man actually rounded up all his friends and had them take turns assaulting her. Fortunately, an 80-year-old man heard the commotion and came running. The old man warned them to stop, then quickly pushed aside the thugs surrounding the girl. He grabbed one of them and warned him not to bully her, but the thug told the old man to get lost. Seeing how brazen this group was, the old man began to issue a stern warning. If they didn't let the girl go, he'd knock them all to the ground. Unexpectedly, this was met with mockery from the thugs, who called him an old bastard who's about to be put in a coffin, and asked how he dared to lecture them. To their surprise, the old man threw a punch right at him, knocking the thug who had just warned him to the ground. Seeing their buddy get hit, the rest of the thugs instantly surrounded the old man. However, the old man remained very calm. Clearly, he was no pushover. He quickly took off his jacket, ready to take them on one-on-one. But to his surprise, these thugs showed no honor. They stabbed the old man in the abdomen with a knife and then began kicking and punching him frantically. All the thugs closed in, taking turns beating him. After venting their anger for several minutes, the old man, barely clinging to life, tried to struggle to his feet, only to be kicked repeatedly by the gang leader, who kept hurling insults at him and demanded that he get up and face him in a fight. A few minutes later, after the gang leader had vented his anger, he finally stopped. He was certain the old man was just an ordinary passerby. Even if he beat him to death, he wouldn't face any consequences. But he never could have imagined in his wildest dreams that his nightmare had only just begun. The old man he had beaten to death turned out to be a notorious local gang boss, and his younger brother Richie was none other than the god of London's underworld back in the day. Soon after receiving the call, Richie was stunned. He simply couldn't believe his ears. In his mind, although his older brother had retired, his status and prestige in the underworld were still enough to intimidate any gang. Yet the trembling voice of his close friend on the other end of the line forced him to accept the reality that his brother had been beaten to death by thugs. So, from his home in the United States, Richie immediately boarded a helicopter bound for London. As soon as he landed, without even resting, he rushed straight to the alley where his brother had met his end. The police at the scene tried to stop him, citing the need to preserve the crime scene, but Rich paid them no mind. He tore through the police tape. His eyes were filled with nothing but hatred, and he completely ignored the officers as he strode straight into the scene. But when he arrived, he saw that aside from his brother's still fresh bloodstains, there were no other useful clues left behind. The only senior female police officer at the scene quickly recognized Rich. She was a bit nervous at that moment. She knew that once this god, who had been so ruthless and decisive in the past, sought revenge, it would surely unleash a bloodbath, and public order throughout London would spiral out of control. With that in mind, she quickly warned Richie that if he dared to cause trouble in London or interfere with the police investigation, she would have him thrown in jail. However, Richie merely shot the policewoman a disdainful glance. In his heart, the law was nothing but a ridiculous joke in the face of his brother's cold, lifeless body. He would not be bound by any rules. He would only use the most direct means to make the killer pay with his blood for the blood he had shed. Before long, one of Richie's friends unexpectedly stumbled upon a complete video of the thugs' assault that day on a hidden website. Although the video was blurry, the only thing that stood out clearly was the terrified girl. So, following this sole lead, Richie quickly tracked down the girl's workplace, hoping to pry some information out of her. Unexpectedly, the moment she thought of the thugs' brutal methods, she realized that if she revealed anything, she and her family would face terrible retaliation. Her eyes filled with fear, she dared not say a single word, no matter how much Richie pressed her. However, Richie saw right through her. He knew full well that mere threats would be useless against this terrified girl, so he appealed to her deep-seated sense of guilt, revealing that the elderly man she had tried to save was his brother. Upon hearing Rich's identity, the girl finally confessed everything. It turned out the thugs belonged to the E2 gang, led by a man named Aaron. Although most of them were young, they outnumbered their opponents and acted with brutal ruthlessness. Yet none of them realized that Aaron's men had witnessed the scene of Richie approaching the girl. Shortly afterward, at his brother's funeral, before Richie even had a chance to speak, the brothers who had once fought alongside him arrived of their own accord. The butcher, Butch, was like a scalpel, familiar with every part of the human body, capable of dissecting any corpse into perfect pieces within 8 minutes with extreme precision. The executioner, Watts, had a fiery temper and employed methods that were cruel and merciless. The torturer, DK, possessed extraordinary insight. With just a single glance, he could see through the deepest lies and fears in anyone's heart. These old friends who had fought side by side needed no words. A single glance was enough to reach a consensus. It seemed that London's underworld was about to be turned upside down this time. Before long, they apprehended 2 small-time thugs in an area frequented by the E2 gang, intending to force them to reveal the whereabouts of their boss, Aaron. Little did they know that the moment these thugs saw the 4 elderly men, they were certain the old men wouldn't dare lay a finger on them. At most, they'd just give them a verbal lecture or scare them a bit. After all, the E2 gang was a powerful force these days, and a few old men couldn't stir up any trouble. Armed with this belief, left. The thugs arrogantly demanded that the old men let them go, suggesting they might even spare their lives. These words, however, only served to excite the four old men, and they couldn't help but burst out laughing. Next, the enforcer Watts landed a punch and began teaching them a lesson. Then DK made his entrance. He grabbed a hammer and a long nail and drove it straight through the thug's thigh, nailing him to the chair. When they saw DK pick up a power drill, they were so terrified they wet themselves. They began begging for mercy, but it was already too late. DK drove the electric drill straight into the thug's leg. Even the hardest bone couldn't withstand the drill's assault, and soon the thug passed out in agony. By this point, Nick, who had witnessed the entire scene, was overcome with terror. All he wanted was to save his own life and escape. He now knew that these elderly men were more terrifying than the devil himself. If he didn't confess, he'd be the next one to have his bones drilled through. In his panic, he blurted out a random address, hoping to bluff his way out of the situation and escape the torture. But DK saw right through his lie, because when a person fabricates a lie under extreme fear, their eyes and micro-expressions give them away. So, to serve as a warning, DK drilled a large hole into the leg of one of the companions standing nearby. His companion's heart-wrenching screams completely shattered Nick's mental defenses, so he quickly offered to help lure Aaron into a trap. But how could such a clumsy scheme possibly fool these veterans? Butch swiftly grabbed his machete, ready to finish Nick off, but to his surprise, Richie suddenly stopped him and even ordered Nick's bonds to be cut. However, the moment the ropes were untied, Nick immediately jumped up to launch a surprise attack, but in the very next second, he was killed by Rich's gun. It turned out that Rich adhered to the unwritten code of the old-school underworld. He disdained hunting down someone who was tied up and waiting to die. At the same time, he had long anticipated that a desperate criminal like Nick, once set free, would instinctively resist, which gave him the perfect excuse to take Nick out. By now, another thug with a hole drilled in his leg had already died from the pain. So to track down Aaron, the old men began sweeping the city to round up his henchmen. Soon, another unlucky soul was caught by them in a parking lot. The old-timers immediately hung him upside down. The thug refused to say anything and instead kept hurling insults at them, which completely crossed Rich's line, because in his mind, insulting his family was an unforgivable offense. However, for a scumbag with no limits like this, only the most violent means could silence him forever. So in a rage, Richie slipped on his tiger claw and began beating the thug mercilessly, killing him on the spot. But just as Richie finished him off, he injured his back from using too much force and had to be hospitalized temporarily. Meanwhile, over at Aaron's place, the successive deaths of his henchmen had completely ignited his rage. He quickly ordered his men to bring in his ex-girlfriend, whom they had previously assaulted. He intended to force her to reveal the old man's background, but to his surprise, she immediately called Richie and, unexpectedly, uncovered a shocking clue. It turned out that all those old men were actually in the hospital at that very moment. So, in Aaron's eyes, this was the perfect opportunity to strike a decisive blow. Not only could he get rid of this troublesome group of old people once and for all, but it was also the best chance to re-establish his authority. So he immediately rallied all his brothers to take up arms and stormed into the hospital. Soon, a female gang member spotted the name on Richie's bedside table and without hesitation fired 2 shots. She smugly believed she had pulled off a major feat, and in her mind she had already begun fantasizing about returning to receive Aaron's praise and the dream of rising in the gang's ranks. But just as she turned around, she saw Richie standing right behind her. From the back of the ward, 3 other elderly men slowly emerged, their faces twisted into sinister, cold grins.